Now I'm going to go through a couple of general questions which interest many different people in different ways, and willy-nilly I must relate them to the state I'm in, which is what it is and is shifting all the time. So the question that I want to begin with is a question which has been on many people's mind for a long time, and it's the question of politics. It's a sensitive issue. There's been some very, what can you say? Intensive, we'll say this time, campaigns going on in that area for quite some time. And I know that many people have been thinking about these things, and they've been wondering what's going on and what's the future gonna be and what direction should we as a people take. So the one very unique event which has happened this year is the election of a man called Donald Trump to be the president of a community of people called the United States of America, which is a very unique community where very many interesting people have emerged and lived and experienced things and developed things, and a lot of stuff has happened on that land and by the people who live on that land and many other lands, all part of the great motherland. And there's a lot of talk about this. There's a lot of noise and there's a lot of views. And people feel strongly about it. So what do I have to say about this question? Do I have anything to say? Do I have any opinion about this? About the Donald? About Hillary? About the left and the right? Maybe I had an opinion a few moments ago. Maybe I don't know what it is anymore. Maybe I'm changing my opinions all the time. I just feel like starting with this question and see where it takes me. I just start with it because it's a question I know many people care about. So I'll try to come with some kind of approach to it, which, makes at least some sense from my personal perspective where I happen to be. Then, of course, I have to discover what is this perspective which makes some sense. Because at the present moment, I have to frankly admit I don't have any clue what I'm going to say in the next minute. So, we'll just have to see. But what I can say is that I will try to my best ability to, remain with the question, as they say, and try to approach it as well as I can, whatever that may mean. So what is my view on this issue? Maybe I'm not gonna focus all that much specifically on the election in the United States of America, but more talk about politics in general. First of all, it's pretty obvious that I haven't made up my mind about anything of this, and this is very much a playful exploration into these questions. I haven't made up any very strong views. But generally speaking, I do have this impression, and that is that sometimes people are in one way, other times they're in a different way. And And sometimes they just kind of generally seem to be doing a little better than other times. This is, of course, spoken from a human being. It's like sometimes there's a style which is just, it feels more right, let's put it that way. And other times it just feels a little bit off. And I gotta admit that when the subject of politics comes up, that may be one of those times when we've got a tendency to come a little bit off. And it's weird conversations that appear. It's weird mentalities which surface. And it's like we're taking up this memory bank of thoughts and perspective and ideas which we relate to the question of politics. And it's like this memory bank that has its roots hundreds of years into the past, and it's a memory bank which has developed through some, let's call them hard times, when people haven't treated each other all that well and haven't necessarily been at their best. So let's just say that the general thinking about politics among people seems to be of a somewhat inferior quality, especially if one compares it to the way of thinking that the average person has about matters of immediate importance to their own life. It's almost as if they only use 1% of their capacity when the question of politics comes up, and like great parts of the mind is being shut off. Maybe it's just a habit. It's maybe not that they want to shut it off, but it just doesn't seem to be any action in those parts of the mind. So what am I thinking about here? Well, it's like the question of efficiency, the question of time management, having a good time, and having good conversations. These are values which are very dear to people. However, I've noticed that when the question of politics comes up, this has a tendency to be not even mentioned by a single word. It's just like it's all gone, like it's never been here. And then you come back to your friends and suddenly it's obvious you want to have a good time. It's obvious you want to be in a good place. And it's obvious that if you've got an hour, you want that hour to be the best hour you can. Another way of saying this is that the quality of the debate itself seems to be drastically inferior whenever politics is the theme. And when the people who work full-time as politicians walk onto the stage and they begin to speak, there's this weird feeling that they're not speaking for real. It's something strange. It's a kind of an act that they're playing, but it's not even a good act. It's not a very interesting act in the artistic sense, as it's very repetitious and ugly and stupid, and they're not listening. So they're not listening to each other. They're not actually even discussing the issues of politics. They never even mention politics. They walk on stage and it's supposed to be about politics, and then not a single word is said about politics. It's really weird. So what is politics? Well, one way of approaching it is to see it as resources. Distribution of resources in society. This is also sometimes referred to with the expression the economy. And that, it must be said, they do often use those words, the economy, when they supposedly talk about politics. However, it seems to be a cliche, because they never get into what is the most important question of all in economy, which is how to be economical with resources. So the question is, how could resources be used economically? Now, what could be resources? Many things can be resources. We've got what we call natural resources, but we also got what we call human resources. We got knowledge resources. And these resources, they all mix together in this one big interplay, where we gotta find a way of working together in order for all of the people to get the best deal possible. So now I stumble upon one angle to this which seems interesting. Politics is about finding the best deal for the people, for all the people. Then, of course, we have to remember that all the people are part of the natural ecosystem, and their entire life and well-being is dependent on the rest of the ecosystem. So therefore, actually, the best deal for the people is a deal which is good for the whole ecosystem. So it's actually the deal which is good for everyone. So politics is the pursuit of a deal, or maybe we could say another expression which is even better, arrangement. I love that word, I gotta admit. It's actually one of my favorite words. Arrangement. Do you know what? I love it so much I'm gonna say it the third time. Arrangement. So politics is the pursuit of the best possible arrangement. Really one arrangement, which is the general arrangement of the entire existence and the course of events. But then, of course, that is a very big, complex thing, and it's always moving. So for sake of simplicity, we can also talk about smaller arrangements within the larger arrangements, smaller events within the larger course of events. And if those arrangements happen in this or that kind of a way, then this also includes the distribution of resources. And where the end goal is to find an arrangement and the distribution of resources which is fair and beneficial and can work as well as possible for everyone. Of course, the irony which I mentioned is that for some reason or other, this doesn't seem to actually be talked about in the political debate. They talk about lots of other stuff, like stuff that's happened before. Like, who the fuck cares? It's happened before, it's over, history, let's move on. It's like, what are we going to do about that now? Yeah, he made mistakes in the past. She made mistakes in the past. Yeah, guess what? We all did. Let's move on. Proceed, please. But they just keep doing this. I don't know exactly what it's all about. So, therefore, there's this sense of a lack of talking about what is the issue. And that's a big part of it. And then there's another really weird thing which seems to be related to this. As we all know, human beings use language. That's what I'm doing now. And this language has a lot of strange constructs that we use. Categories. Maneuvering devices, we can also call them. Because categories are basically maneuvering devices. It's a way of us navigating through a world which is infinitely rich and complex, and where everything is moving everywhere at the same time in an endless space. So that's where we are using these maneuvering devices of categories, labels, etc. And they have their unique kinds of influences. Now, in what I've noticed as the political debate, there's some very peculiar maneuvering devices which can be described as the left and the right axis. So it's like there's this idea of this imaginary line where you have one side of the line, which is called the left side, and you got the other side of the line, which is called the right side. And to make it even more visual, it's like it's painted sort of red on the left side and blue on the right side. And then, when we're talking about these questions of the arrangement of all the people and the actual situation we're in and how to deal with the situation, we seem to always be interpreting this through this filter of this imaginary line of the right and the left side. And a part of the game that's being played is to place people somewhere on this line and their ideas somewhere on this line. And if people are placed with a certain distance from each other on this imaginary line, then that is considered and imagined to be that they want different things. And suddenly we got this imaginary conflict. Now, one part of this is that the people on the left side of this imaginary line, they have a tendency to think in terms of the larger community. The people on the right side of this line, who are placed there, are the people who have a tendency to think in terms of the personal individual. Now it's pretty interesting that there's never been an individual who hasn't also been a part of such a community, and there's never been a community which has not existed completely made up of such individuals. So therefore they are speaking about exactly the same thing, but they are using different metaphors. And then you got certain values: fairness, moral purity, freedom, security. Now the interesting thing is, you very seldom hear the people say that they want us to leave those values behind. You very seldom hear this. Quite the contrary, you hear that some people say they want fairness and security and moral purity and safety. And some emphasize it a little more than others. And then there's this idea that we have to make a choice, either one or the other. And once again, the most interesting thing here is what they don't talk about. They don't mention efficiency of resources. They don't mention economy of resources. They sometimes say the word the economy. But what they talk about is the distribution of something called money. Money is an abstraction which is associated with certain physical structures called coins and bills, and also with numbers on the screens of computers and telephones. And this is this is one of those very popular navigation devices. However, the value of money is always directly related to things in physical space, processes, things that happen, resources, stuff that makes people happy. And what I've noticed is that these categories that people are put into, they also manifest as these, what they call parties. So a party is a group of people. And some of the parties are mentally associated with some point on this mentioned imaginary line, and others on the other side of this line. And if these parties are both far enough apart on this imaginary line, then there exists an idea in both of their minds that they cannot cooperate. This, of course, is totally imaginary, since they essentially want exactly the same thing, but it's a result of this mentioned imaginary line. So therefore, you have these groups of people who, because of this system of imaginary divisions, feel compelled to work against each other's interests. So that means that one of the groups spend a very large amount of time and energy trying to undo the work of the other group. while the other group spends a very large amount of time and energy trying to undo the work of the first group. And they try to get into the office. This is a very important thing for the people involved in this, far more important than economy of resources, efficiency, the actual situation, what we're actually gonna do, how we're gonna move forward. This question of who is going to get the place in the office. And the tradition is that there's 4 years where you can get into the office. And when you're in the office, then you try to undo the work of the people who were in the office 4 years earlier. And for various reasons, they have a tendency to shift. So the net result of it all is that no development happens and no learning takes place, because all of the attention and all of the energy is being spent on this constant struggle for getting into the office with the gang, and then making sure that the other gang does not get into the office while we remain in the office. And the other gang outside of the office, they say, we want to make sure that we get into the office while that gang gets out of the office. And this becomes the central theme that these people focus on. And 4 years is not such a long time. And pretty much the entire period of time, apart from certain duties which they have to perform and some cooperations which happen usually informally, the main focus of politics is this continuous game of reshuffling of gangs between offices, associated with the imaginary line of the left and the right. And a part of this game is that the conversations which happen publicly and which the rest of the people are supposed to base their decisions on are actually not real conversations at all. And they never seem to get around to actually thinking together about what arrangement is the best arrangement for everyone. Now, I have a suggestion. I think that the best arrangement for everyone is an arrangement where most of the conversation has to do with something else than what gang should be in the office. Instead, a conversation about what we as people, without any concern for these imaginary categories, could do, how we could move forward, and how we could arrange our daily existence so that all the resources in our incredibly, spectacularly beautiful world, the little time each of us has to live, can be organized in a way which works very well for everyone, and where we could, first of all, begin to discuss this question and put aside the question of the gangs in the office for a while. And then we can find out how we can investigate this even better, and even better still, and what other possibilities haven't yet been tried, and how we can use all of the new technologies which have appeared among us in this period where all the political conversation has been this old game of the gangs in the office. So in short, my view of politics is that priority number one is to begin a real political conversation. A conversation where we put behind everything that's happened before, and we don't get stuck up on these random, abstract, imaginary divisions, and we begin to look together at the core issue, which is the situation in the whole world right now, all the people in the world right now, and how we can find a way to move forward together in a way which actually works for everyone. And how we could simultaneously with this develop systems to ensure that we will get there eventually. And since this is a goal which is in everybody's interest, this is a goal where everyone can cooperate. And I feel confident that if we choose that path forward, we are going to be a lot more happy about politics than what we were in the period when we chose to spend that time ruining the existence of each other. If we could instead move forward and begin where we are, and begin with the very investigation itself, and with the very conversation itself, then I can't see any limits to how wonderful our existence could be.